has referred small lender Ubank to the National Consumer Tribunal, recommending it should be fined for reckless lending and forced to change its business practices. It was revealed last year that about 80% of Ubank's R1 billion loan book was to gold and platinum miners. The move by the NCR comes just months after African bank investments had to be rescued by the Reserve Bank following reckless lending practices. Well, Lesiba Mashapa is the Credit Regulator's company secretary. He joins me now in studio. Lesiba, thanks indeed for coming in.
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to the viewers.
Well, so the NCR finding that Ubank has granted credit recklessly to consumers. What exactly did your investigation reveal?
In respect of reckless lending, it was credit that was granted to consumers, which made them to be over-indebted. And I must again stress that this is a finding from our investigation, which has now been referred to the tribunal for a decision. But it's really about credit that was granted to consumers, which we believe has made them to be over-indebted, and they couldn't afford that credit at the time when it was granted.
Let's talk about those consumers. Do we know anything about the numbers or the magnitude of those affected and the severity of their financial troubles?
The number will be determined once the case has been finalized, because investigations that we conduct are usually based on a sample size, and then based on that sample size you refer the case to the tribunal, and in your relief you will request for example that an audit report must be submitted in respect of certain contraventions. But reckless lending has a negative impact on consumers, because it means consumers can not only afford that credit, but also other living expenses. And I'm talking about this not only in relation to Ubank, but in general. That's what we find to be the problem, that after credit has been granted to consumers recklessly, they no longer, for example, can afford to pay municipal accounts and school fees and buy groceries.
That very scenario leads to what we see on the ground with regards to social unrest and so forth, because you're dealing with very, very desperate consumers. I mean, what's the remedy here? Because where would a consumer who needs money turn to if everything he or she's met with is unscrupulous?
Look, I mean, in the first place, we always say that as consumers, and including myself, we shouldn't apply for credit if we know we cannot afford it. And if we can afford it, we should apply it from a reputable credit provider who is going to provide that credit in a manner that will enable you as a consumer to afford to repay that credit and still be able to live.
Yeah. How widespread is this, Lesiba? I mean, here you have a situation where a lender, a formal registered lender, is lending money to those consumers who are already in debt and are already in trouble with other lenders. Are you surprised that this is still continuing despite the fact that we've seen so much around lending practices last year? How widespread is this?
The lending to consumers who are in arrears on other accounts seems to be an industry problem. You know, it's an issue that we pick up through our investigations, that a consumer will be 3 or 4 months in arrears and the lender will still lend to that consumer. It is an industry-wide problem. Yeah. And in this case, we want the tribunal to make a specific ruling on this, that it is reckless lending, so that we can curb this practice. Obviously, if the consumer is in arrears, it means they are struggling to pay the current accounts. And one wonders why they are still then being given credit, despite the fact that they are struggling to pay the current accounts. And that information is available to the lender. Yep. At the time when credit is granted.
Very briefly, before I let you go, here you have a formal institution, but we know that on the ground there are loan sharks. There are many that are not registered that are doing this on a wide scale. How do you intervene in that regard, very quickly?
The NCR has been conducting what we call raids, unannounced inspections in various towns in different provinces on a monthly and quarterly basis. Yep. And when the National Credit Amendment Act comes into effect, all people and entities that are offering credit must register with the NCR so that we have their physical addresses and we can conduct routine inspections. So we are continuing with this work to make sure that we eradicate this problem in South Africa.
All right, very well. That's where we're going to have to leave it. From the NCR, Company Secretary Lesiba Mashapa, thanks indeed for coming in.